All right, some of you that may have been hit a little too close to home, maybe you need a marriage translator in your life. I'm not here to offer that, but certainly here to talk about the importance of marriage. And as we've been going through our last 2 weeks, we're in the midpoint of the series. If you've missed a week of it, you can go on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page. There are videos there and audio as well for those messages. So today, we are going to get on commitment number 3. In our first commitment, we talked about the importance of seeking God together. And I really can't, we said this was our cornerstone habit or cornerstone discipline for our marriages, to have a Christ-centered marriage, to build a more successful marriage, a long-lasting marriage, was that we are heading in the same direction. I would love to have added it in on the first week, but I heard a pastor speak once, and he said the importance of heading in the same direction, and the way you identify a spouse, he said, is that you pursue God with everything that you have, and you run as hard as you can towards God. And as you're running towards God and you're working in your relationship on God, you look around and see who else is heading in the same direction for you. And as you see that person and that person catches your eye and you catch their eye and you decide that you're heading towards the same goal at the same speed, and you have the attraction and all those other things that are important in relationship, that is a person that could be someone to marry. And so many times in our relationships, unfortunately, we either start out with different goals and we don't think enough about them, that we end up heading in different directions, or there are things that happen within our relationships and stuff that we identify different goals. Maybe there's a change in our faith or something, and there's a challenge. And for those of you that are following God and seeking God with all your heart, and your spouse is not, Paul talks about that an unbelieving husband will be redeemed by his believing wife, and that there is something powerful even within a marriage relationship about someone who is believing, praying for their spouse and living out their faith there. And so the importance of seeking God together. Last week we talked, last week we talked, and I'm going to draw a blank on what exactly we talked about last week. Fight fair. I tried to block all fights out of my mind, which is why. Last week we talked about the importance of fighting fair, and the importance of when we have disagreements, it's not when they happen, or how, it's not when they happen because they will, it's how they happen, and it's how we fight. Because disagreements are going to happen in a marriage. And if we are coming and offering our whole selves and truly speaking our mind, truly talking and sharing with each other and disclosing our feelings, disagreements are going to come out. And these aren't necessarily have to be full knockdown, blowout fights, but they could be. And even in healthy marriages, we have these disagreements. And the challenge becomes for us that as Christians, how do we fight fair? How do we fight in such a way that it's not about me winning the battle, it is about us as a couple moving forward together and being able to come to a place that moves us forward, and both being able to say that we won that disagreement because we're better off by having communicated through whatever issue it is. And so today we're going to be talking about having fun. And unfortunately, in many of our relationships in marriages, we know too many couples that have come to a place in their relationship where they stop enjoying being with one another, where they've come to a place where maybe they don't have fun, that life happens and gets in the way, and they stop enjoying each other. And I want to submit and suggest to you today that God really takes delight when we enjoy the blessings of marriage, when we enjoy the blessings of our relationships with one another. In fact, in our scripture that's listed in there, we're not going to read through all of it, but we're going to touch on part of it today from Ecclesiastes chapter 9. And certainly I would encourage you to highlight this later on this week, or highlight it today and go take a look at it. But we want to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, and we're going to look at it in the NLT first, and I just want to look at a summary in the NIV. But if you could do something with me, let's read it together and hear, and just some background on Ecclesiastes. This is Solomon, supposedly writing, the son of King David. He's writing at the end of his life, looking at all his pursuits of his life, and seeing that most of it was meaningless. Most of what he lived for, most of what he did was meaningless and not maybe worth the time that he put into it. And then at the end of his life, this is at the end of the book, he is saying some of the things that have been worth his time. And it's interesting to note what one of those things are. So if you can read with me. Live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. And so in other words, there are a lot of days where we go to work, where we get up, where we go through our day and they're kind of meaningless, they're kind of toilsome, and we kind of run the rat race. You all know what the rat race looks for you. We wake up, we make breakfast, we pack lunches, we go to work, we come home, we do homework, we cook dinner, we give baths, we put the kids to bed, or we put ourselves to bed, and it's like rinse and, wash, rinse, and repeat, right? That's the way our life goes, and we go through this over and over and over again, and there was some of it that feels very worthless in a sense, meaningless, but yet, interestingly enough here, Solomon finds meaning in the mundane things. Find joy, live happily with the woman that you're married with your partner, with your spouse, and think of all the things that become mundane in your marriage. Getting up, waking up and seeing each other in the morning, sitting across from one another at the breakfast table or at the dinner table, the text messages, the phone calls, the shared work, all those things can seem meaningless and mundane. We go through them very quickly throughout the day, and yet Solomon is saying here, live happily. Make the most of those advantages. Solomon doesn't say it's the exotic things that are worth putting our time into. It's the normal, everyday things. In the NIV, they translate this passage, enjoy life with your wife whom you love. Enjoy life with your wife whom you love. And so when we think about this, when we think about what the Bible says and marriage, here we have Solomon very clearly here saying that we should find ways to enjoy our marriage. Enjoy your life with the person that you are married to. And this is important for us because marriage is hard. We talked about on the first week some of the statistics that say 50% of all marriages end in divorce. I challenged that number a little bit with some other statistics. Maybe it's more like 26 or 27, 28%. And then for those that are involved in church and practicing faith together, that number is usually lower. That's still to say those numbers are too high. But marriage is tough. And if we're going to be married and we're going to live in a marriage and commit to marriage and covenant to marriage, then we should enjoy it. And we should find someone that we will enjoy life with. I was touched this week in seeing the picture of Barbara Bush and her funeral as she's laid in repose, of the one picture of her husband, George Bush Sr., sitting in his wheelchair, not wanting to leave the chapel, or the place where he is. They were married 73 years. For those of us that have been married 10, 15, I'll be 18 this year, 73 years seems like an impossibility. That's so far off into the future with Andrea. But they spent 73 years married together, which is just absolutely incredible. And my hope is to live that long together, to stay married that long together, that they were able to enjoy their life together. I've had the privilege over the last couple of years to teach a class called Marriage and Families at Wesley College. And on the very first day of class, we talk about a very clinical definition of marriage from the textbook. And I want to share it with you today. It says this: marriage is the emotional and legal commitments of two people to share emotional and physical intimacy, various tasks, and economic resources. Anyone notice anything that's missing in there? Love, yeah. Doesn't say anything about love, right? And I've got the song in my head. What's love got to do with it? Okay, sorry. You guys can sing better than I. That's probably it. The passage, the definition here, it recognizes across different cultures that marriage has different values. It recognizes the importance of emotional and physical intimacy. It recognizes the importance of shared economic resources, that marriages, especially in countries and during times and cultures that still practice arranged marriages, those marriages had had an economic emphasis on them. But it does leave out the idea of love. That in some cultures, love is not brought into marriage. You are arranged to be married to someone, and it doesn't matter whether you love them. Maybe at best you learn to respect that person, or maybe love is brought into that. But in our culture, it's a little bit different. In our culture, we date, hopefully for love. We hopefully marry for love. And so, that becomes an emphasis for us. But yet, we all know of marriages that are loveless. We know marriages that over time have become stale, marriages over time that have become broken, and where love does not exist. And I would say that in some ways, and not every marriage, but in some marriages, a reason for that staleness is because we forget or have lost the ability to create a newness or a freshness. We've lost the ability to have fun in our marriages. We've lost the ability to have adventure. And without romance, without adventure, without physical intimacy, marriages can be reduced to simply a business relationship of two people who live in an apartment together sharing economic resources and various tasks. That second part of that definition. And it's two roommates living under the same roof, but yet living two entirely different lives. And the communication in a marriage can simply become about who's picking up the kids today, what bills need to be paid, what do you want for dinner tonight, what time are we going to eat tonight, what's happening here or there. And so the communication changes. It takes on a different feel. And what's interesting is that for those of us that have ever dated and fallen in love and maybe even gotten married, like, you don't fall in love with someone you don't enjoy being around, generally speaking. At least I hope not, right? We fall in love with someone. You've never heard someone come off of a first date or second or third date and be like, man, this person is really lousy to be around. We have nothing in common. We have no fun. It was just drudgery being around them. I think I'll ask him out again. We generally don't do that, right? We come home from a first date or a second date or a third date, and we're like, oh my gosh, this person, like, we have so much in common. We had so much fun. We laughed all night long. Like, it seemed like that we were only talking for about an hour, and we realized we'd been sitting in the restaurant for 3 hours, and the waitress was really upset because she didn't get to turn over our table. And when you're in a relationship like that, sometimes what you can do is you just end up talking, and you enjoy being together. And that's the importance of having fun in a relationship. And some of you have been in conversations or have been in a relationship. We've talked till 2 in the morning. We talked till 3 in the morning. We talked till the other person fell asleep on the phone. And so what I want to offer to you today is that within our relationships, and especially within marriage, is that having fun is essential. And even having fun and enjoying our relationship is really a biblical thing to have, as we see from Ecclesiastes, to enjoy life with your wife, with your spouse, with your partner. And so what I want to offer and suggest today is that if you don't have time for fun in your marriage, you may one day find that you don't have a marriage. If you don't have fun in your marriage, you may one day find that you don't have a marriage. Because we will get caught up in work, we will get caught up in the kids' activities, we'll get caught up with pursuing whatever, and when we come home and we lay down at night with our spouse, with our partner, we will look at them and wonder, who is this person that I'm laying beside? Because we don't know them any longer. So this morning, what I want to offer is 3 ways that we can have fun in our marriages and in our relationships. So these are 3 kinds of fun that every marriage should or must have. And the first is face-to-face fun, and we're going to take these in regards to postures for us today. So if you're married, think back to the first few days and weeks where you met your spouse and where you were able to, where you were dating. You probably spent a lot of FaceTime together, and that's not on the phone FaceTime, but you probably spent a lot of time talking to one another. I can remember when Andrew and I met in college, we found every opportunity to get together, to talk, to hang out, whether it was in class, after class, at lunch, wherever it might be, we enjoyed talking together. And it got to the point where we talked about and started dreaming together. I can remember on our very first date, she will contest this, but I believe it's true. We had both traveled at that point. She had just come off of 6 months in India and Nepal doing mission work there. I had previously traveled to Brazil to do some mission work there. And so we were actually met in a missions class. We went to a Christian college. And so as we were talking about some of those things and some of those experiences, I still remember, Andrea, again, will contest this, but I'm right, so, because she's not here right now. She's downstairs. I'm right on this. I firmly believe that on that very first date, we actually talked about someday, each of us, not like we were dreaming of our life together at that point, but we both talked about the importance of adoption. And for us, and we've lived into that dream, and we have Malachi, and in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, we're leaving again to do that. And so that face-to-face time where you start dreaming together becomes fun. And for those of you that are younger, like Andrew and I would actually talk on the phone. I know that's difficult. Like now we just text and we don't bother talking on the phone. But we would talk on the phone and talk till 1 in the morning or so. And I can remember, we'd talk on the phone and Andrew would fall asleep and I would just listen to her breathe, which isn't creepy at all. It's not creepy at all. I think I told you I stalked her too in college. Now I'm listening to her breathe. Yeah, you guys remember that, right? Really, I'm not creepy. But the challenge in marriage, though, is that face-to-face time, and it usually happens when we start having kids in our marriage, that face-to-face time gets replaced by the family business meeting where we talk about who's picking up the kids, what are we eating for dinner, what time do we need to eat, when are we going to get Malachi to baseball and Chloe to softball and Abby to ballet and Chloe to ballet and do all those things, and I still got Bible study and praise team, and how do we get through our day? And FaceTime, the face-to-face fun that we would have in talking and dreaming to one another gets replaced by those conversations. They get replaced by conversations like, who's spending too much at Wawa? That would be me. They get replaced, when you go to bed 2 hours later than you hoped you were going to go to bed, and then instead of talking to one another, you end up watching TV for 30 minutes to fall asleep to, or you end up thumbing through your phone and looking at Facebook updates and not talking to one another. As couples, we need that face-to-face time. Because what allowed us to fall in love in the first place was talking to one another, was dreaming together, was discovering things about one another. I want to take a look at a passage from the Song of Songs. And if you remember last week, I mentioned that this is a book of the Bible which Jewish boys had to reach a certain age before they were allowed to read it because it is so provocative, and I would even suggest erotic. And it is in our Bible. And this is one of my key books that I will always say in one of my beliefs as a Christian, that you don't know what's in the Bible until you actually read it. And so the importance of reading these passages. And Solomon has an encounter with a Shulamite woman who he marries, and we see some of these postures in it that we're talking about. So in chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, I want to read through here real quick. And this is in the NLT. And this is Solomon talking to the woman that he loves. He says, "How beautiful are your sandaled feet, O queenly maiden. Your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a skilled craftsman. Your navel is perfectly formed like a goblet filled with mixed wine. Between your thighs lies a mound of wheat bordered with lilies." See what I mean here? Use your imaginations. "Your breasts are like two fawns, twin fawns of a gazelle." Now, Solomon says this repeatedly through the book. He is really excited that there are two of them, that they are matching. And there are a whole lot of things that I would love to say and crack jokes about right now, but I realize I'm on live stream, and I am trying to go on to sanctification. So if you want to hear my junior high mind, come grab coffee with me, and we'll talk the passage later. He goes on, "Your neck is as beautiful as an ivory tower. Your eyes are like sparkling pools of Heshbon, the gate of Beth Rabbim. Your nose is as fine as a tower of Lebanon overlooking Damascus." Guys, I'll just warn you, if you tell your wife, spouse, that she has a large nose that's as big as a tower, probably not the best idea, but somehow culturally, I think that was a compliment back then in there. But you kind of get the point here. Solomon, as he is talking to the woman he's marrying or married, you will notice that he is working from the ground up, starting at his feet, her feet, working up to her thighs, up to her breast, up to her face, and ultimately her eyes. The next verse is about her eyes. And what you get in here, guys, in thinking about this, is we often do headlines. Solomon is keen on the details of the person he loves. He knows the details. Solomon is not just saying you are one fine mama right now. He's not like, you are looking hot, He's not doing that. He's saying, you are beautiful, and this is why. This is what I find beautiful about you. And I think that in our relationships and in our marriages, we can get into the trap, men especially, that we stick to headlines. We stick to, in that face-to-face conversations, we just give the high points. I will come home from a meeting, let's say a lead team meeting here at the church, and Andrea is just as invested to the church as I am. I come home, it's 9:30 at night, and she's like, "So how was the meeting?" "Good." "What you talk about?" Not much. Stuff, yeah, kind of. Any good conversations?" It went pretty much as planned. And at the same time, we spent money for a sign, we're talking about remodeling the kitchen and new ministries and all these things. I'm thinking big picture headlines here. What she wants is the details. In that face-to-face time, guys, it's important for us, and we talked about how most of us as guys will stonewall during conflict situations where we'll shut down and not say anything. Especially men, our wives want to hear details out of us. They want to know how our day's going, not because they're just annoying, how was work? What did you do today? Did you do this? Did you do that? No, it's not so much that. It's because they care about us. They want to know. They want to know how our day is. They want to know how we feel. They want to know what our dreams are. And so we learn to work in the details. And so part of that fun that we have in our marriage is continuing to grow in our knowledge for one another, continuing to share details in the sharing life. And this is why it's so important for us to have a regular date night. And I hope if you're married, whether you've been married 1 year or married 30 years, that you have a regular date night. A night that you have set aside at least once a month to go out with no kids, to go out with no distractions, and to set time aside to talk. We had a date night last night. We did romantic things, like we went to AC Moore, we went to Dollar Tree, and we went to Target. We're getting ready for our trip to China. But then we went to La Hacienda, and we had the slowest server ever, which led to a 2-hour dinner, which was nice. And we got a chance to just talk. And we sat beside each other. We didn't sit across from each other, because I don't hear very well in those situations, and I wanted to hear Andrea. And we talked about how we were feeling about China and the adoption, and we talked about our kids and how they're going to do when my parents are down and watching them. We talked about, realizing this is going to be our last date night before we have 4 kids. And those are important times for us. And trust me, I get the struggle of finding time for a date. I have 3 kids. We don't have family around here. We have to shell out money for a babysitter every time we want to go out on a date. But that's a commitment. That's important for us to make that time available to spend the money for a babysitter. I get not having time. Those of you in our small group, you've seen our calendar on our fridge, and you know how filled it is to try and find time for a date, but we always try to carve out time for each other to do that. And so we need to have face-to-face time. And let me just say that sitting beside each other or text messaging each other really doesn't count. That's not good. Okay, 3 kinds of fun every marriage must have. Face-to-face time. The second is side-by-side or side-to-side time. Solomon says in verse 11, "Come, my love, let us go out to the fields and spend the night among the wildflowers." In other words, they are heading out for a getaway. They are going away together. They are doing an activity that they love, that they will find engaging with one another. This may be going to the beach, which is something that we love. It may be going camping. It may be going out to NASCAR or someplace else, whatever it is that you find affirming and that you love to do as husband and wife. And in our relationships, we have to take time to do the things that we enjoy with each other and that we each find it's fun. And there are going to be times where we choose to do things with our partner, with our spouse, that we really don't want to do, but we know that our partner, our spouse, enjoys to do that thing, so we choose to do it. I love the movie The Breakup, Vince Vaughn, Jennifer Aniston. I use it for a lot of, in my marriage and families class, and Jennifer Aniston in there in the midst of this big blowout. If you've ever seen the movie, you probably like it and remember it. Jennifer Aniston says to Vince Vaughn's character, "You've never taken me to the ballet." Do you guys remember the scene? And Vince Vaughn looks at Jennifer and says, "Why would I take you to the ballet, Brooke? You know I hate the ballet." And Brooke looks at him and says, "But the person you love loves the ballet." And this is why it's so important for us that we find time to do things side by side that each other enjoy. We find time to do things. Guys, if you know your wife likes the ballet or the theater or whatever it is and you hate the ballet, do you know how many brownie points you will be getting to buy her and surprise her with tickets to the ballet? Ladies, same thing. You can't stand going to a baseball game with your husband or to NASCAR or to go fishing with your husband. Do you know what it communicates to them that you'd say, "Hey, let's go fishing together today"? Or let's go out in the woods and let's take a hike. Your husband knows you don't like it, but you say, "No, let's do it anyway," because you've taken that time to do things side by side. And so, generally speaking here, women enjoy that face-to-face time where we are talking, where we're disclosing one another. It's very important that emotional intimacy that we share. Often I find that guys, we enjoy that side-by-side time, that we enjoy doing things together with our spouse, with our parents, with our children, and that's where, ladies, that's often guys will talk more when we're doing an activity together. We won't often talk when we're sitting in bed at night. At least I don't find that I do, and other people I talk with. That's one thing, but when we're out doing something together, that's when we tend to open up. It's the same with my parents. It's broaden this to relationships. My dad and I will just talk about sports and weather when we're sitting on the couch or something like that at the house. But when we start working on the house, when we start working on a project together, and we have that time, that's when we start talking about, well, how's the marriage going? How's things with Andrea? How's the adoption going? because we're doing something together. And there's importance on working side by side. And so, three ways of fun: face-to-face, side-by-side. The third one is belly button to belly button. I couldn't find a better posture for this one that would be church appropriate in here. Let me just say this. Sex is a beautiful thing that God has given us, and from a Christian standpoint, that is to be enjoyed within the covenant of marriage. And the Bible has a high view of sex and its context, but the Bible communicates that sex is something beautiful and enjoyable. For so long, the church has had this, within church history, we've got this 2,000-year church history that sex is for procreation. Certainly it is. We know how that all works biologically. But it's also there is an enjoyable aspect to that. Again, you know that stuff. Song of Solomon. Let's go back here again. Solomon is, or actually this is the woman saying this: "Come, my love, let us go out to the fields and spend the night among the wildflowers. Let us get up early and go to the vineyards to see if the grapevines have budded, and if the blossoms have opened, if the pomegranates have bloomed. There I will give you my love." What the woman is saying here to Solomon, I think you already know. Let's go out. We're going to have sex in the park. That's what she's saying. I don't recommend this now because if you get caught, there are charges attached to that. Not that I know if by experience. But she is saying here, if the pomegranates have bloomed, if the flowers are out, they're doing this side-by-side activity together. And they get to this point, if the flowers have bloomed, you got a little Barry Love playing in the back, or Barry White playing in the background, and let's get it on, And this is what the woman is saying there. There is an importance to our sexual relationship in there. And so the woman is saying, let's enjoy some time together. And, I know there are sexless marriages. I know there are things that happen in a relationship where physical intimacy become difficult. There are physical things that happen to us, both male and female, that make sex and physical intimacy difficult. But what I want to say today is that God has created us and wired us for relationships, and within the covenant of marriage, sex plays a major role, and physical intimacy plays a major role. Men, your spouse needs to connect with you emotionally, and that leads to greater physical intimacy. Men, they need to hear from you. It's not just flipping a switch and going into the bedroom and, Barry White doesn't just play at that point. The better that we do, men, at emotional intimacy, connecting face-to-face and side-by-side, it leads to a better, stronger intimacy all around. Men tend to interpret a lack of sex the same way you would interpret a lack of conversation. That if you see it as a crisis moment or a crisis time where your husband doesn't say anything or share or disclose things in conversation in that face-to-face time, men often feel the same way when sex or physical intimacy is not present in the relationship. You begin to question, maybe she doesn't care about me, maybe she doesn't. All these things enter the mind. And when couples come together, and this is the importance, that when couples come together on their wedding night, we talk about consummating the marriage. That's when the marriage becomes real. My Old Testament teacher in college, he used to say he would speak almost every year of the 4 years I was there on Valentine's Day in our Valentine's Day chapel. I don't know why he was the one that always got to speak on sex. Maybe because he was Old Testament and studied Song of Songs. I don't know. But he talked about that when a husband and wife consummate their marriage and then continually keep their sexual relationship vibrant, that each time they come together, it is a recommitment of the marriage covenant. Because the act of sex is not just an act of sex of trying to have a pleasing experience. It is me giving myself to my wife and her giving herself to me, which is what we do at our marriage ceremony. That I give myself to you for better, for worse, for sickness and health, forsaking all others, till death do us part. And so in a very spiritual way, in a very deep way, that physical act becomes a re-engagement, a recommitment of our marriage covenant. And so I want to challenge you today that having fun in your marriage is not just something that is outside of our Christian faith or even outside of the Bible. It is something that the Bible directs us and encourages us to do. Enjoy the wife, your life with your wife. Solomon in Proverbs has another verse that says that you should enjoy the wife of your youth and allow her breasts to satisfy you. always. Like, this is the Bible. And again, if you've never read those passages, read your Bible. They're all there. I'm not making this stuff up. There's no 1 Steve 4:2 or anything in it like last week on there. But I do want to challenge you that there's a caution here that if we are not walking with our partner, with our spouse, in the same direction in our faith, if we are not coming together to strengthen our marriage and to share the emotional and physical intimacy that each of us desires and ultimately we need, then we're opening the door for temptation to creep in. That if we are allowing our guard to come down, or if we think that we can go throughout our day, guys, without deeply talking to our wife, or ladies, and sharing your physical intimacy, your physical love, whatever it may be, wherever your wall is in your relationship, if there is one, then we are opening the door for temptation to creep in. We're opening the door for bitterness to come in. We're opening the door for contempt. We talked about that last week, to come in to our relationship. And if your partner or spouse doesn't receive love and intimacy, then they're going to be tempted to find that love and intimacy somewhere else. Because ultimately we encounter these as needs. We need to be known. We want to be known in our life. And some of us, we covenant to be faithful, and we live into that as best we can. But it is a partnership of two people. And biblically speaking, in Ephesians chapter 5, we are to give ourselves to one another, submit to one another out of holy reverence to God. And so, if you are withholding your love, if you are withholding your emotional connection from your spouse, then think about what compliments from a coworker are going to sound like. They're going to sound like new life, fresh water coming in. To be flirted with by someone that you may find attractive, and if your relationship is going to feel invigorating. And so in our lives, in our marriage, like, no one wakes up in the morning and decides, hey, I'm going to throw my marriage and my family away this morning or today. No one wakes up and just decides that in a vacuum. It comes from days and weeks and months and even years of us forgetting how to have fun together and how to be connected to one another. And so in your marriage right now, if the grass is looking greener someplace else, it's time to water and fertilize the grass where you're planted. It's time to invest in your marriage and in your relationship, because you've covenanted to be there. And at some point you've fallen in love for a reason. And the Bible says that if we're not, that we need to repent and turn back to our first love. Now that's talking about God, but I think it's important in our marriage too. That if we've gotten far away from each other, we need to repent and turn back and begin working towards remembering our first love. So our commitments are to seek God first, to fight fair, and to have fun. And so my hope for you in your marriage and your relationship, that you start where you're at. And maybe it's just going to be starting at having better face-to-face time, to talk and to share, to encourage one another, to pray for one another. Start doing some activities that you love. Sometimes those feelings follow action. We got to see love in action before sometimes we feel it. And so my prayer is that we can grow Christ-centered marriages in our families so that we can continue to be a witness, not just for those around us, but for our children and for our friends, about what the importance of marriage and the strength it can bring. So would you pray with me?